Thank you to the Center for making tonight possible. We're going to have our panelists all come up and sit down. I'll tell you briefly who they are, but it's more fun to have the panelists introduce themselves and to tell you what their roles are as it relates to our topic tonight. So right next to me here, Paul Chung, the CEO of the Center for Public Integrity. Let's start with you, Paul. Give us the 30-second version of what your organization does and how it relates to AI in journalism.
So Center for Public Integrity is one of the oldest investigative nonprofit in America. So we basically hold bad people doing bad things, especially around systems of inequality. Also, New Yorker for life.
That's an important part. Next to you, Paris Martineau is the feature writer and investigative reporter at The Information. What is The Information and what do you do there?
The Information is a online news outlet. We cover tech and media news and are kind of best known for our scoops on anything related to the largest tech companies in the world. I am an investigative reporter and feature writer, so I kind of, much like you mentioned, to hold powerful people to account.
And now powerful algorithms as well, the age of AI.
Yeah.
Next to Paris is Syria Matu, the lead of the Digital Witness Lab. What is the Digital Witness Lab?
Sure. So hi, I'm Surya. The Digital Witness Lab is basically a lab that I started at Princeton University. It's informed by about a decade working as a data journalist in news outlets such as ProPublica, Gizmodo, and most recently at The Markup. And basically the way I think of our work at the lab is we bring engineers, journalists, and a bunch of different people together to investigate tech and AI. And the way you should think of us is like photojournalists in Algorithm City, taking pictures of the streets of what's happening in the algorithm so we can tell.
In Algorithm City.
That's right.
Right. And you're taking those photos, why?
To witness what's going on so we can report on it and tell the stories in a way that's precise, clear, understandable, and actually is grounded in the reality of people's experience, not just what talking heads tell us is going on.
Right. And on the other side from me, Christopher Chung, the managing editor for Smart News. Chris, what is Smart News?
Smart News
For those who don't have the app on their phone like I do.
I was about to pitch that to you guys.
Yeah.
So Smart News is a news app. You can get it on your phones. And we are an algorithmic recommendation app that serves you news from all sorts of news publishers, from Reuters to AP to LA Times to whoever. They're all in the app. I'm the managing editor. I lead the news team there. And so we have algorithms, but we also have humans running kind of a mini news operation, 24/7 kind of a news hub situation, and we send breaking news alerts and cover major stories so that people can get the stuff that they want to read as well as the stuff that they should read about the news.
Since we're talking about media literacy, AI, and journalism tonight, and the subhead is challenges and opportunities, let's establish first, what is the role of AI today in the news business, in the news that we all consume? And I think, Chris, you can address that for us first, because that's right where you left off. Like, how much of what we consume right now has some AI in it or some...
Yeah, I think right now we're sort of in this new world of generative AI, and that's kind of a different place than where we've been. And so where we've been until now is algorithms and machine learning, but not machines writing stuff for us, So
tell us about the pre-Gen AI era. A year ago, before ChatGPT, what was AI already doing?
Yeah, so for example, you might have computer-generated or AI-generated corporate earnings stories, certain kinds of stories that are very formulaic, that are kind of dependable every month or every quarter. So you might see things like that. You might also see, there's the writing and reporting aspect of news. Then there's also the sort of curation and the sharing of news. So you might also see algorithmic recommendation, which is what you've seen in Smart News for a long time. So an algorithm that kind of understands what you like, what you've clicked on, what your interests might be. And so our app might kind of share that to you, and your feed might look different from the person next to you. And so that's kind of where AI and machine learning has been, I think, in journalism. I don't know if you guys can think of any other examples right now.
Until ChatGPT, and now it's generative AI, which means the robots are writing full news stories, yeah?
Well, that's the question. Are they? Are they? Should they? That's kind of what we're here to talk about, I think. Yeah. And so in some places, absolutely some places are doing that. And I think the kind of Wild West that we're in right now is every outlet has a different approach to it. Nobody has an agreement on how much you should use something like ChatGPT in their work. We're having that discussion within our own organization as well. So I think that's a huge question that I don't have a really good answer to.
Paul, why don't you take it next? As someone who thinks about, I think of what you all do as very human, and the kind of journalism that can't be done by generative AI.
No, investigative journalism could not be replaced by algorithm, but with AI, it could definitely expedite the way we think about the journalism. I think, when we think about AI, we so focus on, ChatGPT in terms of what is writing, but we also forget that it is a tool made by human, and you could use that as a way to think about the analysis. You could think about what is missing. In fact, what's missing is often the goal for investigative journalism, because if AI is just really a repository of everything that people think the internet is, there's also a lot of stuff that's missing, right? A lot of the people of color, a lot of our data is not represented in the internet. So by using AI, you often, if you're subject matter expertise, you often immediately know, like, here's the 5 things that's missing. And maybe from what's missing is where it could lead us to great, better journalism.
Right. Let's just check before we go any further. How many people here have used ChatGPT or Bard or one of these Gen AI programs? So just to get a sense of it, almost everybody is saying they've tried it at least. I gotta be honest. I tried it when it was all hot and buzzworthy when it first came out. I don't use it every day now. Do you, Paul? Do any of you use these tools every day?
I
Okay.
use it every day.
You do? Okay.
I do.
So for
I
those
use
who
it quite a
do,
bit.
for those who do, tell us how. Paul, tell us first, or Surya, tell us first.
I use it to write code. It's
To
really,
write code,
it's
okay.
really useful for writing code.
Yeah.
It makes. I have a 7-month-old child, and the things that I used to do in 2 days, I can now do in 2 hours, and it's very useful when you have that time constraint. So
Yeah.
I would say it's really useful if you know what you're doing and how it works, and you know how to ask it questions and give good answers. And with code, it's usually right or wrong. If it's wrong, I can tell how it's wrong. So there's less issues with bias and the other kinds of problems that we see with it.
Right. Chris, what about you?
I use it for both question generation sometimes, if I'm thinking about what kinds of questions I want to ask people. As a team lead, I'm doing kinds of like team management things. So even coming up with question ideas for candidates, but also coming up with plans. For example, right now we're trying to put together some editorial guidelines that we want to update. And so just to get it started, because sometimes you're sitting there in front of a computer and you don't know what to start with, you just say, hey, like, this is what I'm thinking. Give me like a first draft or some thoughts, and then you can bounce ideas off of. It's kind of like a friend, you can kind of bounce ideas off of it.
But so far, these are 2 examples that aren't actually creating journalistic products, right? They're not writing articles. Are there uses like that you use it with, Paul? Or
No, what I do sometimes is I will put articles that we have written. I rarely put things that we are working on, but things that we have written, I will put it into chat and ask, could you produce a summary for a 5th grader? Or could you produce a summary for a McKinsey consultant so that I could see what is the difference or how the language model is thinking about the investigative journalism that we're doing? How do we communicate to different demographic and different audience? So that usually give me some insight in terms of like, oh, they're framing it this way. Personally, I use it, because I'm not the most finesse when I'm like annoyed at something. So I usually put all my email into ChatGPT and say, please reframe this so that I don't sound like a crazy person. And so I think that's really helpful as a way to sort of point out the tone. But in terms of work-wise, I do often go put stories, they say, what are the questions that is missing from this story? So I think in that sense, it helped me become a better, quicker analysis. Give me better analytics.
Helps you think, helps your brain, helps you be more efficient. Paris, are there any uses for you?
I'm surprised that I'm the outlier on this panel.
Well, me and you.
I was going to say, I don't
Good.
use generative AI on a day-to-day basis really at all. I think in part because a lot of the uses I hear from colleagues or even the people on this panel about kind of synthesizing information, I think that the kind of routine of going through my notes, trying to identify what I've missed or what I haven't is often when the best ideas kind of strike me. And that the roteness of that and getting into the details is really something that I think is integral to the journalistic process. The main way that I use any sort of AI in my day-to-day reporting is the auto-transcription tools, like Trint.
Which one do you use?
I use Trint, which
I use like otter.ai. Same idea.
That's a really,
transcribes an interview.
you put in your interview, you get a very easy, searchable kind of
good
transcription.
enough, it's not perfect.
It's not perfect, but it's great for searching and comparing your notes. But Trint.
Yeah.
I think Trint is the best one of all of them.
I like Otter,
I
but
know
I haven't tried
it's definitely an Otter versus Trint world. Yeah,
Oh,
there's
okay.
a lot of conflict between
Well,
the two.
Trent's founder is a journalist. He was a anchor for ABC News.
Interesting. Were you going to jump in, Chris?
No, I was just going to say that some of the things that you described, Paris,
Yeah.
about like going in and kind of honing your thought and picking out the things that you want to focus on. I feel like, as a former college student, I used to do a lot of homework, problem sets, that kind of thing with people. And the best ideas and solutions came to mind when I was working with somebody.
Right.
And so sometimes that's how I feel about ChatGPT, which is like if I give it the work that I'm doing, it can give me feedback that's really helpful.
Interesting.
Maybe that's the way I should have done it. I was writing a book this summer, and I was afraid to use Gen AI at all because I didn't want to know. I wanted to know where how do I put this? I wanted to know all the words were mine. I was afraid of any circumstance where ChatGPT plagiarized a sentence and I didn't catch it and stole it from some website, and then I'd be responsible. But what you're describing is a different way to use it, which is here's what I've already written. Give me feedback on it. Yeah. And that could be a more nuanced way to use these tools.
Yeah, the thing ChatGPT work the best is when you actually are the subject matter expertise. So I will basically put bullets and thoughts, and I would say, could you actually reframe this in this particular way based on information that I input? I think a lot of people who call it flat-footed is when they actually don't have subject matter expertise or they're lazy. They just say, could you write me an article about X? They're going to give you a lot of terrible information. And you might not even know it because I will use it often to do some research. And because the way I do the research, I know I'm like, oh, they're giving me wrong information.
Right.
And so I think that's the part where we have to be really careful about it. It's only useful if you put in really thoughtful stuff into it.
Right.
And it's worth diving into that for a second because I think people conflate this often, and especially in the reporting of these systems, where the thing ChatGPT is actually doing is trying to predict the next word based on the previous words that were said in that sentence. It has no idea about the context. All it knows is that from the trillions of billions of documents it's been trained on, when you have these 4 words that come before this, usually the next word is this one. So that's fundamentally what it's doing. So if you already, as Paul's saying, if you have the subject matter expertise, what it helps you get is the language, the style, the way in which people are talking, but it doesn't really know about the content. So when you ask it about content, it usually is guessing based on what other people have said on the internet, but that's a slightly different thing than being intelligent. I mean, that's a different conversation, but you know what I mean?
To me, that's why right now, only in 2023, this will probably be irrelevant in a few years. To me, right now, Gen AI feels like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. And so it's deteriorating over time. But I assume it's not going to remain that way for very long. And so we also have to talk about where we're going to be 5 and 10 years from now with this technology. Is there a version for ChatGPT and Gen AI of Googling yourself? Do you ChatGPT yourself? Have any of you ChatGPT'd yourself?
I've done a bunch of people.
Good, so I'm not the only one. So when I tested this out on myself, it said I still worked at the New York Times, which is a place I left like 11 years ago. And there's no way to like tell the algorithm it's wrong, right? Or because it's pulling it from Wikipedia or whatever it's pulling it. So aren't people going to hit the same problems they have with Google search, right? Where it's like they hit a wall, they know something's wrong, they can't fix it?
Well, so that actually is the perfect example of seeing how it actually works, where it doesn't know about your facts. It just knows that you're a journalist, you live in this ecosystem, and people who are like you are likely to be in one of these places. So I think that's kind of what. So if you want to see which like cluster you fall in, it's really useful for that. But it doesn't know the specific paths, and the different algorithm. Bard is trying to do a different thing using the same mechanics, and that does something closer. But ChatGPT specifically is trying to write sentences based on your question and trying to predict what the next word in that sentence should be based on what you ask it. I mean, you might have a better understanding, but.
And just staying with you for one more minute on this topic, because when I hear about Digital Witness Lab, I'm thinking about the war between Israel and Hamas right now. Are there ways that these tools are being applied in the field right now by journalists or by investigators, by open source intelligence? Can any of you speak to that? Do you want to start?
Yeah, so I've been looking into that. So far, I think the bottleneck is not generation, is distribution. So you don't really need. So far, it's going to change, but so far, most of the distribution is where the power lies in misinformation. So if you already have a network built of how to get things spread, you have like a hub that has a lot of followers, and they are more, you don't need the generation to be super efficient, because you can make 10,000 images, but it's still going to be that one person who causes it to
Who
spread.
makes it spread, I
Exactly.
see, right.
But we'll get there. We'll get there over time.
Because we are seeing, people making, there have been examples of, totally made up images that are making you think it's from the war zone, as if the war zone's not horrible enough already. There's this
But
the
the
fakery
reason you've
going
seen
on
it
top.
is because someone like famous has posted it or misunderstood what was going on or something like that.
Right,
Just
right.
the issue.
Are you seeing any of this in your work at CPI? Is AI, for example, useful at all in looking at satellite photos from Gaza or from Israel or something like that?
Well, most of our stuff we expose are less sexy than that. We tend to focus on systems of inequality. So I would say right now we're not using AI for that particular purpose, but we're doing a whole investigation that requires us look at really old real estate deeds from the 1800s. So what we are doing is we are building a machine learning model to read those cursive handwriting, because right now, you can't actually because the AI could not predict those handwriting style. So those are the things that we are trying to apply for journalism's benefit. But I would say in terms of the mis and disinformation is just because it has the word intelligent in it, do not be fooled as actually intelligent. There's just a lot. You just have to be super skeptical about anything that generative AI give you.
There's conversations in lots of newsrooms about how to apply the technology, how to use these tools. I think you mentioned earlier editorial guidelines at Smart News. What about the information, Paris? Information covers tech, so it's experiencing this very up close, this AI revolution. Do you all? Is there a committee? Are there meetings talking about how to use Gen AI in that kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We cover OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, so we have kind of a different approach to it. Often what we're talking about and reporting on is the business behind the business, which adds kind of an extra level to it. But I suppose when we're talking about the use of this in the newsroom, largely we try to stay away from it in terms of reporting, just because it's not particularly useful on our day-to-day, other than, I guess, what you guys are talking about kind of having a conversation with yourself using this technology. There have been a couple of examples in terms of our business and technology team, for instance. I guess some sort of issue with how we are trying to increase our SEO on certain topic pages. If you have a topic for, say, Amazon or Google that lists all of our articles related to that, previously, for each topic, you'd have to have a reporter, an editor, write some copy, a paragraph or two about Google or Amazon to make sure that page was indexed by Google search. Right. Now we're using ChatGPT and then have an editor look over it, correct any mistakes, and publish it. So I think that's the one kind of use case that we are seeing on a day-to-day basis.
And I think that's one of the big hopes here, is that the drudgery, the most rote versions of work in media or other fields will be the ones that'll be replaced by the robots that can do it more efficiently.
One area where we've talked about it, but we haven't kind of actually put anything together is a big part of journalism is trying to come up with a good headline for things. It's hard. I'm terrible at it. There are some editors that are good at it. We've thought about kind of putting essentially our articles before they go out through something like ChatGPT and having them pitch a headline based on our past headlines. Obviously, it wouldn't be the headline that de facto goes in the article, but maybe your editor could look at 3 and be inspired.
Yeah, up until now, that's been known as A/B testing, where you'll try out 2 headlines and see which one performs better with users. Theoretically, you can now A, B, C, D, E, F, G all the way down.
Yeah.
All the time, 24/7.
Yeah.
Chris?
Headlines, ChatGPT is good at producing lots of different headlines, and sometimes they're really good and sometimes they're really bad. And so that's why Paul is saying, you have to have expertise to make the output from ChatGPT useful to you. It's similar. I think the question about, you're saying that the use case and the information is it's kind of basic and it's not journalistic specifically. Mm-hmm. And I think that's similar to how we're approaching it, because once you get to the question of doing something journalistic, you're on thin ice, or you're getting into really tricky territory, because journalists pride themselves on truth and accuracy and all those things. And so if you're using AI to put something out that's supposed to be true and accurate, and you're not totally sure if it is, then you're putting your entire business at risk. So I think that's a huge question. We're struggling with it at Smart News. We are experimenting with things like headlines or summarizing, like stories that are trending in the app. We're testing to see if ChatGPT can summarize them, and then you can show lots of different versions of that article to people. But there's so many questions that come with something like that, like how do we verify that it's actually doing a good job and not making something up? And all these questions are really, I think, at the crux of this issue.
And I think this goes back to the point you were making earlier of that these tools inherently are designed to mimic human speech in a way that is convincing. They're designed to create sentences that mimic the patterns of many sentences before and look accurate. So it makes it very difficult then if you're an editor who's 2 levels removed from whatever the subject matter, you're like, this seems right. I probably don't need to fact check every part of this sentence. And then you get in trouble.
Yeah. But what I would say is ChatGPT is only one tool. There's actually numerous sort of AI generative tool out there. So for example, there's Excel GPT. It's like sometimes I just I don't remember how to do a pivot table anymore. I haven't done one for a while. But you could use AI to do that, right? And math is crucial for investigative journalism, right? Like knowing how to like look at data and analyze it in different ways is really crucial. So I would say like it's not just ChatGPT, but there's all these other tools. Like I use this other tool, PDF.ai, because when I'm reading like documents that are hundreds of pages, like normally like people have to in the old days, like you literally have to read page by page, right? Now you could actually use a tool to ask like interactive questions. And what I like about some of these tools is if you ask the question really smartly, it will tell you the answer, and some of the tools will tell you like, here's the page that is, that the answer is in. So I would say like, look at it as a research enhancement tool to make you do things more effective and efficient, but it's not gonna do the work for you.
Right. Well, I think Midjourney is another example. There are a lot of these image generation tools that I have not played with enough personally, but I can already see some media companies using them to create images that are not trying to pass them off as real. There's something different. They're a version of animation. Are there other tools that any of you want to shout out that you've found useful, that you've noticed come in handy?
We've come across, because we have publishers in the app of all different stripes, we've come across publishers who are just using AI, tons of AI in their stories. And one of the stories included an AI generated photo of Barack Obama as a very flamboyant, dancer on the street at some point. And I would say one great tool to use is an AI image detector tool.
Right.
And nobody knew if that picture of Barack Obama, even though clearly it wasn't real, they didn't know how it was created, and we ran it through an AI image detector tool. So something like that. Like I think if you're reading the news in general, you have to be aware of what's going on, right? And you have to be concerned and careful about what may be the provenance of some of these things. And so obviously read carefully, think, be discerning, but then also when it comes to images, that's another tool you can use.
Yeah. Let's play this conversation out a few years and try to picture what the media world is going to look like in the near future, the foreseeable future. Because I find that, right now, we're talking a lot about the opportunities. We're talking a lot about the upsides, how to be more efficient, how to use these tools to come up with better headlines and make our articles smarter and more searchable. But aren't we also going to get closer and closer pretty quickly to a point where these algorithms can write articles, can replace journalists, can fool people into thinking they were written by journalists? I mean, let's play out some of the darker scenarios, if that's okay, to prepare ourselves. Anybody want to go first? Is there one that you have? Anyone, the greatest fear you have? Oh.
I don't know about I suppose one of the fears, you can already see it starting to happen with news outlets using these sort of generative AI tools to write stories that can very well replace journalists. Geo Media, publisher like Gizmodo and Jezebel and whatnot, they have started, much to their union's chagrin, using these tools to publish listicles and blogs, some of which are entirely inaccurate. Same with CNET has also done this. So I think that we're going to see that process be refined and expanded. And a lot of these jobs that for many people are entry and mid-level career opportunities in journalism are going to cease to exist because ultimately the business opportunities, the structural system of journalism in many ways cares about page views, ad dollars, and if you can generate that without labor, it's going to opt for that option.
Chris, should people ponder, students in the room, should they be thinking, what, and not just now, but 3 years from now, what can I do that the algorithm can't? What can I do that the machine learning model can't? Is that the question we have to ask ourselves now?
I think you need to think about that. Paul, I was talking to Paul briefly about a panel of his that I saw recently, and one of the answers was journalists should learn to use AI because journalists who don't know how to use AI may be the ones who are replaced by AI. I guess that was like sort of the dark conclusion of that discussion. So I think, while unfortunate, like if you learn to use AI, that means that's a very positive thing for you. Like, and if you have subject matter expertise or you have knowledge, you can utilize and harness AI in a way that somebody else may not be able to.
Right.
I'd actually push back and say they shouldn't learn how to use AI. They should learn how to code. Because I think it's like you teach a man to fish was, the old saying. And the point of that really, and I've done this a lot, like I've worked as an investigative data journalist. And if you understand what the machine is doing, you can then actually challenge the PR person who says what they're doing. So when Facebook says, I fixed it, we often go back and say, no, you didn't. And I know you didn't because this is not a fixable problem. And then you just have to go and find the example. So it's kind of like if you're like a finance reporter and know how to read financial documents, it's a similar thing. And you can use AI for that.
Yeah.
We'll be there in about 10 minutes, I promise.
Yeah.
We'll get
So
there.
I would say the opportunities. I'm not really worried about AI replacing journalists per se because a lot of the content that a lot of journalists are written should be written by AI because literally no journalist's dream is to say, I'm here to write, what Apple is earning this quarter or like what the weather is like today. I mean, they're very important information. But these information is really structured that can be written by AI. So that will free reporter up time to actually do community service, right? Like really every reporter can be an investigative journalist. And that's basically what we need, right? We don't need precious journalism resources to tell you, what earnings like different companies are making. But I think my fear is, because it's so easy, you're going to see a much greater array of mis and disinformation.
Yes.
Because literally, people could spin up a pretend news company and start pumping fake stories.
100,000 a
To,
day.
so to
million
me,
a day.
that is the biggest fear.
I think we've already seen that because we have publishers coming to us to try to, ask to be in Smart News. And I'm pretty sure last week we got a request from a site and everything was just generated.
Oh, really?
And and
But you could tell at least. At least
could
it was
tell
still clear.
because any one given piece of output from AI may be okay, but like when you just put a ton of them on a page,
The volume.
like some of them stick out. So like I think the top story, breaking news top story was like the history of the Peloponnesian War or something like that, which made no sense. But other stories on the page did make sense.
Oh.
And then I ran the photo of the founder through the image detector thing that I was talking about, and it was, it was generated by AI.
Interesting.
So I don't actually know.
So
where it
you
came
rejected them, right?
from. I think we rejected them.
I hope you rejected them. But a lot of this lives in that in between. Are we sure? What is this? When I got fired from CNN last year, there was a made up website that said I had been arrested by the military and sent to Gitmo and sentenced to death for some unspeakable crime. And I had a fact checker, like a human fact checker, call me and ask me if it was true. And I'm like, how am I supposed to prove I'm not arrested and at Gitmo, right? But then I later realized that was probably written by the MLM. It was probably a cheap way to make money from an algorithm. And I think in this environment, we're going to have a billion of those articles a day. And the question I think becomes, Paul, how do we defend real news brands? How do we make sure people in this room know what is a real news brand in an environment where there's infinite disinformation?
Yeah.
Please tell us you know all the answers.
I wish. I would say it comes back to how is your local journalism, what is your relationship with news right now? Not in the way that you're consuming it. Right? What is the community relationship with news organization, right? And I think, it has to be participatory. It has to have a feedback loop. Because right now, I do think news is too divorced from community input, and community look at news as like, oh, they're just these, we get lumped in as the media. I mean, like someone who's covering Brooklyn for the Brooklyn Eagle is very different than the New York Times, very different than your daily news, right? So I think you have to ask, like, what is the relationship that you want to have with your local news? I think it starts with local news, not necessarily television, network news, but your local news is really important. Like, they need to hear from you. You have to basically tell, because they are here to serve you, right? If they don't hear from you, they're going to make assumptions, they're going to assume, and you're going to have a very minority fraction of people controlling what they should be doing.
I do want to do some more doomsday scenarios, but here's a positive one. Since you mentioned local news, here's one of the areas I'm most optimistic about when it comes to AI and journalism. Every board meeting, every school board meeting, every city council meeting, every neighborhood meeting should be automatically recorded and transcribed. And that should be a year from now, not 10 years from now. I mean, we're very close to those sorts of improvements. And look, I love the guy that goes to the city council meeting in my town and writes about the meetings every week, but he can probably be freed up to do other things. And that's probably going to be a net positive for everyone. But I do think that the idea that there's so much information that's produced that's not easily accessible, there's so many events that are recorded and live streamed, but then you can't find them. You don't know how to get to them. I mean, I just did a whole book about Fox and Dominion because there's all these amazing legal documents stored in Delaware that no one can find. I turned it into a book because they're hard to find. But 5 years from now, all those legal documents should be, MLM, and it should be, easy to find. So I'm optimistic on that front. Are you as well? That like local news-wise, we can unlock a lot of material out there.
Absolutely, especially with those agenda, right? Like the individual agenda for the month may not mean anything, but because it's documented, now the reporter could actually look at how has such an agenda changed and who's influencing the agenda.
Right,
so
what's off of it?
suddenly
Yeah, what's
your
missing?
journalist is now doing the accountability journalism that they should be doing.
Right.
Right now, they don't have that processing power, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that manpower, right? Because think about the crisis of journalism. Like thousands of journalists are being laid off, right? And if we don't have the manpower to do these stuff, then technology have to augment it in some way or the other. So, here's one of my plea. If you haven't support a journalism, like subscribe to your local newspaper, give to your local journalism nonprofit or even national journalism nonprofit, because that's a way for us to do better work.
Yeah, that's some skin in the game, right? Other doomsday scenarios and then other optimistic ones. Where could this and what directions could we be heading in with AI and journalism? Paris or
I can jump off Paris.
Yeah, go for it.
Doomsday, because I think that's where it gets really bad. Actually, is So I think one thing that we've been talking a lot about is like how AI like is a tool or like the death knell for a journalist. But I think like conflates the financial crisis of the media industry with AI. Like I think if there was money in media, these tools could actually be really helpful and powerful to keep people making more money. But I think those things are related, but not necessarily the same. And there's an opportunity there to fix that. But in the dangerous doomsday scenario, I would say like you get to a place where you've removed all the humans from the newsroom because you've automated each one of these things in simple ways. Yeah. The people who've given you those products that replace the humans, I've done it testing for very simple news cycles. And then something like the crisis we're going through right now and the war we're living through right now happens. And none of those systems are designed to work for those. And then you just don't even have disinformation, you just have noise coming out of the majority of outlets. And then you have no way to discern signal from noise. And that's, I think, when you get into real trouble.
I think I'll give you both a doomsday scenario that could be a little optimistic in the end, which is I think if all of these things go wrong, we get to a place where you have kind of the lowest common denominator of media outlet. A lot of these outlets are optimizing mostly for profit. They've fired much of their staff. They're pumping out listicles generated by ChatGPT or whatever, as well as, your earnings reports, your weather things. You get to a point where, like you just said, trust is low. People are interacting mostly with content they see in their feeds from all of these, untrustworthy sources. You eventually get to a point where people start seeking out news straight from the source, from outlets that they trust.
Human
Ins-
crafted.
Human crafted,
Organic,
homegrown,
grass-fed,
free-range
free-range. Oh, yeah.
journalism.
Bespoke.
This is my hope.
Yeah,
Artisanal.
Yes, made in Brooklyn.
An artisanal Brooklyn-grown news organization, and maybe from there some truth flourishes.
We rebuild from there.
From the ashes, we will rise.
That is a part of my optimistic take. It really is. What I see in this environment, if I'm 22, in my dreams and about to graduate college and going into journalism, I'm thinking, how do I be a curator? How do I be a human aggregator? How do I be someone's eyes and ears, a community's eyes and ears? Not just a reporter. A reporter is part of it. But how do I be their editor? How do I be their ambassador? How do I be their guide? Whether it's through a newsletter or a Threads feed, how do I provide value on top of the whatever going to be out there that's already going to be digitally created? And how do I add humanity basically to a news product, to a media product? Am I making any sense, Chris? Because you all do some little bit of that, but you're also doing the opposite because you're using AI to create the feeds.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what we think about every day, because before AI, there's also a lot of bad content out there,
Oh, really?
And maybe not everybody looks at it all the time, but I look at it all the time because we are very welcoming.
Yeah.
So this problem is kind of just like an augmentation or extension of the problem that we've always faced. And so I wholeheartedly agree that we need to have humans thinking creatively and strategically about what is the purpose for these news products and these news companies. And if we continue to do that, I hope that people will recognize their value and, come back to us.
We're going to questions in 1 minute. So anybody who wants to ask a question, microphone's right over here. We're going to give priority to students to make sure they can talk about these career possibilities and trajectories. But you wanted to add something, Paul?
No, I think that's why it's really important for journalism to participate and start stress testing all the AI products, because we were behind in Web 1, which is like the proliferation of websites, right? When Craigslist happened, we didn't see that coming. So it took a bite out of, journalism sustainability. And then when that part is done, we were a little bit better with Web 2, which is the age of social media. But, but we didn't flourish there either, because we basically believe what the technology company say. They were our partners, and some of them are our partners. But at the end of the day, they're there for their own purpose. They're not there for us, right? And so when you think about, where, formerly known as Twitter, and some of these other technology companies, their relationship with news is just a series of bad dates, because we never took control of what we should be doing in this platform. So I do think right now, as AI is a little bit still very nascent, this is our time to basically say, hey, here's what works and here what doesn't, because most of the data is built on the work that all of us collectively produce 24/7. So this is the time for us to really basically plant our flag in the stake, because if we sort of give that responsibility to the tech company, we're just going to be screwed again.
So it's interesting about Web 2, and now we're in Web 3. That makes me think about regulation. And the arguments that are mostly being had about regulation are about Web 2. We see lots of energy about regulation. Well, I don't want to say lots. We see some energy about regulation and lawsuits against the Googles of the world. Very much about behavior that was 10 years ago. So when it comes to AI and regulation, I say that you all think or say what? What should is anyone going to have rules of the road for this technology, for generative AI?
I think that if we even got the Web 2 regulation in now, that'd be great. We can use it for Web 3. Right. You don't need to go. You don't need to keep up that far. But I think it just goes back to kind of what Paul's saying, that I think the real opportunity in journalism lies in the literacy, like getting tech literacy along with media literacy, so that you can not rely on tech companies to just sell you something and you say, I just trust what it says in the box. You can really interrogate it. Because if you can do that, then you can actually challenge them in ways, because they're not that smart. That's the thing.
Who's they?
The tech companies.
Okay.
People think they're really smart, but the reality is, if you actually look through their products, they're humans. They're humans making stuff, and they're like all humans, they make things that have mistakes, they have biases, and if no one's checking to see if something works or not, the thing that I always find crazy about the AI regulation conversation is that we're comfortable putting humans in like a steel cage 50,000 feet above the air and trust that that will be okay and safe, but we somehow haven't been able to figure out how to regulate computers. It's not a technical problem, it's a political one. And I think bringing the focus back to that is really important to get this to change.
Let's see if anyone wants to come on over to the mic for questions. We'll get a line going over here. Was anybody else on the regulation front while people line up? Any other thoughts on regulation? All right, well, I think we've got our first question. I'd ask you to include your name and organization.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jalil, and I'm actually a student journalist at CUNY Baruch College. And I wanted to ask you guys that, listening to you guys, I'm noticing that you guys talk about things like context, and I think you mentioned earlier that it's not necessarily about the context in AI, it's about like predicting what the next word will be. So I think my question to all of you is, do you think that no matter how advanced AI is going to become, there's always going to be a need for a human component? Because what I've learned taking, whether it's journalism classes or communication classes, like the idea of context is not necessarily something that can be done through like a screen. You kind of have to like interact with people and, things like that. So I wanted to ask you guys, and another reason why I also ask is because I'm noticing with ChatGPT that when you put in certain information, I've never done it with my journalism work at school. I've only done it with like classwork assignments. I'm noticing that when you ask for a certain information, it'll tell you that it only has information up until September of 2021. Here we are 3 years later. So I'm wondering, somebody's going to have to go in, whoever works for these AI companies, someone's going to have to go in and update that. So do you think that there will always be a need for a human component no matter how advanced AI is becoming?
I feel like almost certainly. I think that there's always going to be people within the AI and tech world that say it can operate totally autonomously and is hyper intelligent and is the solution to all of our problems. But ultimately, tools made by people for people are going to require people, especially when put to use in an informational context like journalism.
I would add to that, I think the thing that's changing isn't that humans aren't going to be needed, is that we're going to have to keep learning new skills. I think that's something that's changing at a pace that we're not used to from like previous generations, but like things change so fast now, you just need to keep up with it. But once you have a base level understanding, I think it's actually easy to keep up with the incremental changes.
I think that's why it's important to learn. If you're not going to be a coder, but do at least like understand the basis of how coding work, because I would say like ChatGPT is like really like at its infancy now. Like you just have to be expected that every year and a half, everything that we use gonna basically be garbage, and then there will be a whole new set of things, right? That speed gonna be increasingly fast. But you have to understand like how the fundamental of these technology work, and if you don't, you're gonna basically continuously be behind.
And I would encourage you to put code into ChatGPT and have it explain it to you. I do that all the time, and it works really well.
To the point about right now, it's using an old data set, and a lot of these data sets, there's arguments about whether these companies should be allowed to be using these data sets. Companies at the New York Times and the AP are trying to challenge the OpenAIs of the world, saying you trained your models on our products, on our valuable products, on our books and newspapers, and so that's going to be a fight that's going to end up with payments to news organizations. But that is true right now. It's not always up to date. I think we have to assume, though, tell me if I'm wrong, panel, again, a year or two from now, not only are these models going to be trained on up-to-the-minute information, they're going to have so many more data sets. They're going to be so much more information. I would imagine we're going to be very soon in a world where real-time satellite imagery is being fed into these bots. Real-time transcription of every television network in the world is going to be fed in. So right now, I find this is one of Paris. I wonder if you feel this way as a reporter. One of my joys as a writer or reporter is finding something that's not on the internet yet. Like one of the greatest feelings is a scoop that you have that's not everywhere. It's you're the first person putting it out. It feels so good. You can also do that when you're writing an essay about like something 100 years old and you find it in an actual book in the library and the book's not Google booked, it's not been scanned, it's not anywhere on the internet. And you're putting a piece of information onto the internet for the first time. It's a great feeling, but I don't think it's gonna exist in 10 years. Because I think all of that data, every book in the library then will be scanned and will be in the algorithm, you know what I mean?
Yes, and to your point earlier, a big way that I like to do that in my work is through court documents or city council meetings or,
Right.
all these sort of aspects of our physical world that are not yet real time in the digital space. And I do think
Yeah.
that within the next couple of years, that is going to change dramatically. And I mean, ultimately, I think it'll be for the better because more people will have access to this information.
And that's why you need journalists, because when you have so much information, you need someone to contextualize. And that's basically why we're here. We're here
Yeah.
to contextualize, to basically say, here's how it got to from the history, this is where we get to this point. So journalism is going to be even more essential when you have much, much more data, because you all have lives that you need to live. Meanwhile, we are just like in our desk, chopping away.
I feel that way in the entertainment space as well. Like, so the other week, I love watching The Simpsons. I was hoping there was a new episode on Sunday night, but there wasn't. And I found myself thinking, can't Gen AI just create a new episode of The Simpsons for me?
It can.
And it can. And in
has.
10 years ago, it will. And if Fox tries to stop it, some other show will allow it to happen. And there will be like a nonstop 24/7 stream of your favorite shows, entertainment shows. You can keep watching for the rest of your life. However, in that environment, I'd much rather have a real human work on that show. Like, I'd much rather watch the human-made version of The Simpsons. So it's also going to be we're going to have a curation problem. We're going to have to be able to figure out what's the difference between the algorithmic version and the human version. I'm talking too much, though. Thank you for your question. Let's bring up the next questioner.
Hi, thank you all so much for sharing and demystifying a lot of the issues and the policies around AI. So really quickly, I'll just explain a little bit and then ask my question, because it's a pivot. So I actually work for DEI-GPT, so I hear there's a lot about the data sets. So one, data sets aren't necessarily stagnant. You can have a data set that I think of like the elastic clause to the Constitution. So our data set, we meet weekly. We're literally combing through the zeitgeist, and every day, if there's a new term for diversity, if there's a new issue about how people want to be defined or named or whatever the conversation is, we will literally in real time update our data set. So they're what I would call big AI, right? Like the chat GBTs, and then there's smaller, AI, generative AI models, and we're actually doing the work that is more granular and nuanced. That generative AI doesn't, for whatever reason, they want to make their money. They want their valuation to be $80 billion. So that's one thing. And data sets can be unbiased or much less biased if you actually have people who think from jump. Our intention is to have a non-biased, non-triggering, non-marginalizing, non-discriminatory data set. So if you have people like that creating the data set, then your data set won't be that. It's by design, and discrimination in data sets is by default. So we talk about AI and ethics, all of that. Yeah. My question actually is about who is going to fund this new wave, this new generation of human-centered, I would think more emotionally intelligent, more like nuanced, on the ground, intimate access to journalism once generative AI really takes off with this more, clickbaity, on steroids type of content. So I'm working with Nina Gregory. She used to be the editor at NPR. So these are the conversations we're constantly having. Like, how do we sustain journalists in the 21st century in the age of AI? So where's the money going to come from? Is it user-based? Is it user-based income? Like, where's the money going to come from to keep journalism afloat?
Oh, it's the question I think about every single day as the CEO of a nonprofit. I would say, look, someone always have to pay for something, right? Like, that's how money works. And so I do think that traditionally journalism have been rely on advertising, especially for profit journalism. And nonprofit journalism rely on individual donors, subscribers, and members. I do think the future of journalism is much more diversified. We probably do a mix of still advertising, sponsorship from any corporation who care about ethics in media, to individual donors, to also subscribers. So I don't think the future of journalism sustainability, it wouldn't come from one income stream. It will come from many, many small income stream, right? Including philanthropy, including events, right? Like pickleball is so big, we could be doing a pickleball for democracy event, right? So I would say like, it won't be, unless, we're going to go a European style where like a lot of the journalism going to be subsidized by like the public, which I don't see that happening. We're going to continue have this challenge. And that's why I make my plea earlier. It's just like, if you haven't subscribed to your local news, do it now.
Right.
Yeah, I think the one trend that seems most likely, though, is that advertising support, news organizations that are wholly supported by advertising, that's going to dwindle a little bit. I think we're coming off this period in media where you used to be able to sustain an entire digital media outlet, one, through venture capital dollars, but two, through kind of this promise that if you get enough eyeballs on something, you'll be able to sustain the organization through advertising. And it seems like the bottom is dropping out of that. So it's going to continue to be a more robust mix. Yeah.
And I just add to that, I think along with like the stuff that both of you are saying, I think another part that there is promise with AI and these new technologies is actually to meet readers what they want to be. So that if you don't want to read the news in the format of a New York Times story, how do you make it a TikTok but still give it the information that it has? I think there's a lot of potential to meet people where they are and not have this like highbrow, lowbrow kind of like news experience you have. Like the thing you guys were saying earlier, I like the idea of like the organic news feed. With the organic news feed is going to be expensive versus the fast food news feed. And I think like thinking about how you make that kind of more equitable is something that we can have an opportunity for if we are imaginative and creative in how we produce these things.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the next question.
I was going to ask the same thing, but I was surprised that that didn't come up in your kind of doomsday scenarios, where when the LLMs learn in real time, they're gonna take all the content and push it out. AI generate a new TikTok. That's where the younger people are gonna get the news, and who's gonna pay those journalists? So I guess a combo of the previous two questions.
Yeah. Well, I know from my reporting that is the single biggest focus of every legal department of every major news organization in the world. I mean, meaning the New York Times and the APs and Reuters, they are so laser focused on making sure there is a negotiation that I think is actively underway in some cases, a negotiation about those rights. But of course, you know, the models have already been trained to some degree on the old news coverage.
Yeah, that's why I think journalism need to be thinking beyond just telling people stories, right? In some way, our business should be about changes and impact. What is the thing that we are doing now that actually impact your community lives in ways that could improve your community, right? So we can't just be here telling you a story anymore, because plenty of people could do that. I think journalism's greatest value is when we actually help people inform and engage with their local communities, right? And so I think if we're able to do that, then we could articulate this is the impact that our content is doing, and that is something worth paying for versus, you know, producing just content that you could get anywhere.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very dark doomsday scenario. I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, it's pretty bad. Good one.
Next question. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm Francis. I'm a freshman in media and journalism. So hearing all these, hearing the framework get exploded, the foundation get demolished as soon as I'm starting into this world, I was just wondering if you guys, wonderful panel, have any advice as someone like me entering this with so many changes going on, what to actually kind of like hone in on as I'm entering it with all these changes, because there's so much and it's just a little overwhelming and exciting at the same time. And completely different from what I'm learning in class.
What's like a dream job? What path do you want to be on?
Well, right now I just sent a resume and a cover letter to Warner Brothers Discovery to try their media department. So
is the goal journalism, entertainment, culture? What's the kind of what field or what specialty?
Journalism.
Okay. So like CNN as opposed to HBO. Right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
Do you all want? I have an answer, but you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously it feels like the story of the last 10 years is it's always a tough time to be in journalism. But I think the important thing is to, one, find something about the news industry, a subject matter that interests you, that you then can devote your time to reading, watching, analyzing, and then looking for where the gaps are, kind of like what we were just talking about. Once you find an area that you are passionate about, it becomes a lot easier to consume the news around that and then see what questions do you have that aren't answered. And from there, you can find the content that you'll be able to add to the conversation. I think that is there is an essential human component of doing good journalism that all the technological innovations in the world are never going to be able to replace, which is curiosity.
I'll just add one sentence to that. The advantage that you have is that you don't have to unlearn a lot of things that previous journalists had to learn. So you can actually start clean and learn from now what the tools are now. So that's actually an opportunity too.
I'll just add my 2 cents. Partly it's what I was talking about scoops, that feeling of putting something new into the world. And it doesn't have to be some blockbuster expose. It takes down some, it can be, as simple as what I did on my TV news blog 20 years ago. Like, here's what anchor's filling in for this show. I mean, the simplest little facts, if you're the first person to have them, then you're winning. You're putting new information into the world. And that's how I feel. That's why I pay for my local paper in New Jersey, because those are facts that nobody else is gathering. So to me, that's more valuable than like the 40th person following George Santos around the Capitol. And by the way, you'll probably have that job at some point. Like, journalists at some point in their lives have to be the 40th person chasing down some idiot congressman. But, that there's no value add to being the 40th person in that scrum. The value add is to be the first person to write the investigation into him, or just whatever new fact there is about that race. So I think that's number one, is like find some way to put new information into the world, even if it doesn't seem like big information. And then on the television side, given we haven't talked a lot about TV up here, and there are going to be AI-driven networks, entire networks that are going to read the news to you from an anchor that's impossibly beautiful and seems like they could even be human. That's all going to happen, right? Probably pretty soon. However, and some of you might disagree with me, but when I saw Wolf Blitzer get on Saturday morning when the attack started, and I knew, first of all, when it was Wolf on a Saturday, I knew it was a big deal, right? And number two, I knew I could trust him because he used to be the Jerusalem correspondent. He used to be the White House correspondent, and he has 40 years of track record experience. That kind of human connection, right? That background, that history, and then that beautiful beard, I knew that I could trust him in that moment of crisis. And that is something that's going to be really hard for Gen AI to replace, even though it'll try. So I think we have to think about that as well, that people, especially on television, people want to watch people. They want to watch someone they know and trust. It's why, even though trust in media is abysmally low and everyone says they hate the media, when there's a hurricane coming, you trust your local weatherman. You trust your local meteorologist. That's still true. And it'll still be true even in an environment where most weather reports are algorithmic. Even though you're right, most days we don't need someone to write the weather report. But you're still going to want that meteorologist when there's a storm. So I think those are the openings, for someone starting out.
Thank you guys so much.
Up next.
How do you think that legally news organizations are going to protect themselves against AI or use AI to protect themselves? Or are any of you doing that now?
Right.
Quiet.
I think there are going to be a lot of legal battles around what Brian, you were just saying, kind of the scooping up of content in order to feed these machine learning algorithms. I think that's going to be an ongoing battle we'll see for years. On your second point, I mean, this is, I guess, a different, much smaller doomsday scenario. There's an ongoing legal issue in journalism is kind of this group of, I guess, lawyers that will often try and find specific copyright issues and then sick a bunch of different copyright image suits on different companies. This was a big thing at Condé Nast when I was at Wired Magazine. Of you have to be sure that you have the exact copyrights to every image you use, say in an article. You can't pull something from social media because then you could get sued for using it. So I think that AI will probably be used to increase the volume of that. If you could just then have a tool searching every article ever published by every media outlet and then immediately generating a cease and desist, it's probably going to increase legal expenses, but it's not very exciting.
I mean, I would say on the legal front is reframing of the question is what is it we are suing for and what is it we are protecting for? I don't know. We as an industry actually have some consensus around it, right? All the legal conversation around today, it actually talk about protection of our own IP because the way the industry economic is working, right? So if there's no financial crisis in news, I don't know if this is even going to be an issue. So I think like the questions that we have to ask ourselves as an industry is, if we're going to get into a legal conversation, like what is it that we want? Like, is it about ethical standards? Is it protection of IP? Or is it really sourcing? Because right now, if you go to ChatGPT, it's not going to tell you that this predictive model, like, you know, the question you have around like some restaurant review is not going to tell you that this is a composite from the New York Times, the Daily News, the New York Post, right? It would just give you something about this restaurant, right? So what is it we are looking for? Is it A, attribution, right? Is it B, like financial incentive? Because all of those are very different legal issues that we have to comb through.
Interesting. All right, thank you. Next question.
With so much money being made out of the internet, it's like the internet came from Silicon Valley and just infected the entire world. Like, there's just, people are making so much money by using the internet. And I wouldn't even know what program to tell my kid to learn when they went to college again, if they go to college again, because how would you ever know what programs you're going to need to study so much to work at Facebook or all these places? It doesn't make any sense. So you guys need to make so much money out of regular people just making some food for some other people through apps of all different kinds. And people working in restaurants have to do like 1,000 apps. And I swear, I see kids now delivering food maybe for their parents because their parents are tired, using DoorDash apps and Uber Eats apps. I mean, the system is crashed. So why don't we just admit it?
Yeah. Your point about college and what to learn, what code to learn. I wanted to ask a version of that also when you said journalists should learn coding. 20 years ago, I knew how to write HTML code, but I wouldn't know where to start now. What are there certain programming languages or flavors of this that you would recommend people know the basis of? Is it still JavaScript? Is it something else?
I think Python is a really good coding language. I think there's a platform called Glitch. If you look it up, it's a really fun and easy way to learn kind of the basics of programming. There's actually a lot of really rich content now out there to learn different types of programming. And I think the point isn't to become a programmer to work at Facebook. It's sort of like part of the civic intelligence that you need to actually engage in society in a meaningful way in the 21st century. So it's not necessary that you have to become as good as a programmer to go and work there, but like it'll help you ask them questions which will actually challenge them and hold them accountable in a more meaningful way than they've been held to so far.
I think the question gets something deeper though, which I think a lot of us can relate to, which is sometimes it feels like this technology and these changes are happening to us. They're being done to us, right? I mean, Paris, do you sense that at all on your beat at the information? Like, I see incredible advantages every year, every time there's a new iPhone, et cetera. But you can also have this sense that this is being done to us as a society. Think about something as simple, maybe even as silly as ads that follow you around the internet after you buy the product, right? And then after you buy the sneakers, all you're going to see are ads for those sneakers. And it sometimes feel like the technology is so stupid, so foolish, so basic, even though at other times that it's incredibly complicated and impressive. I don't know. See where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the issue of living in this world that we all find ourselves in, of trying to figure out both how to use this technology in our own personal lives, but not have it, use us or infect our day to day. And I think that part of our duty as journalists is to both separate, the hype from the reality of the situation, understand that these algorithms and AI are not all intelligent beings, that they're tools created by people and can have uses for us and can also use us in certain ways. And the job that we have as journalists is finding a way to cover the way that these tools impact society in a way that is both fair and holds power to account.
Right. Surya?
Just that it's not happening to us by technology, but by the people making the
Yeah,
technology.
right.
So like that's the thing to remember. It's not like the sense of inevitability is constructed. And it's not reality. And I think a big part of the journalism is to challenge that and poke holes to show that, hey, the emperor is actually naked and Mark Zuckerberg isn't much smarter than the next guy in the room. He just was incredibly lucky, right place, right time with some level of, you need like talent, luck, and privilege, right? You need all three to get there. And everyone at the top has had some combination of all three. And we should remember that there's still people, and it's the people who are making those choices. And that's who we have to keep our crosshairs on. And not focus too much on the ChatGPT, but why does ChatGPT exist in the format that it does? Why are the venture funders the ones who have so much power in these situations? All of those kinds of questions.
I think that is so important, and especially, I mean, when I first was trying to decide what part of journalism I was going to go into, I was like, oh, business and technology sounds incredibly boring. I don't really care about chips or what specs a screen has. But I was like, the actually really important and vital part of this is that behind all of these technologies that can feel overwhelming or all imposing are people sitting in rooms making decisions about the state of their business, about how that business and technology is going to impact users. And it's really important to tell that story and to get that information out there.
I was once talking to a CEO of a tech company. Well, I can't say which one. A giant fruit. Big fruit tech company. And I said to him, why don't you buy a newspaper? Why don't you buy the New York Times? And he said, because I don't want Mark Zuckerberg to see me buy a news organization, and he's going to go buy one too. And I thought, that's so interesting. He's thinking about the second and third order consequences of an arms race, that if Bappel does it, then Facebook's going to do it too. And that's the human kind of psychology that goes into some of these things. Okay, we got 5 more minutes. Let's see if we can get 3 more questions in.
We witness these days about media misinformation and fake news. For example, in Palestine, between Israel and Gaza, and genocide in Gaza too. We see also, for example, journalists there talked about 40 babies beheaded in Israel from Hamas, and many media companies talked about this news without any confirmation or any accurate. So how can AI to be utilized to detect and correct this misinformation in media?
I would just say that a part of the problem there is that content moderation, which is where a lot of this comes up, is a really hard problem to solve. When information is being created at the volume and spread at the speed of social media, you need a huge team of people to actually do it. I mean, to the point where companies like Facebook basically are now saying, don't talk about difficult things here. It's too hard.
Yeah, don't post news on Facebook.
Just don't bother, because it's too expensive. We don't want to deal with it. And I think, and I don't, so there isn't, so I think the reason I say that is because there isn't a simple good answer for it. I think the complicated answer is to build this kind of critical inquiry model into all of us. So when you read something, kind of have some way to interrogate where it came from, ask a question of it. And I don't think it's fair to put all the onus on people to do that. But I do think that we have to penalize people harder for when those mistakes are made, so that they're twice as careful before they slip up like that.
Yeah, so I think that is a mix of policy. So in terms of AI and mis and disinformation, I would say if something that's really active going on at the moment, it'd be very hard to use AI for anything. But I would say something that built over time. So for example, when I was at Knight Foundation, we funded Sciline, which is during the COVID, it's basically, we know how COVID mis and disinformation take in these different shapes. And so what you could do is actually fact check them throughout. And what we realized that you could use AI to discern all of these questions that people are asking, this is actually the answer that could satisfy all these different questions. So I would say once you sort of have a large body of things that you debunk, then the AI could become more useful and actually more democratized. Because right now, only the really big newsroom like CNN and New York Times of the world have enough resources to fact check, right? Not necessarily your local newspaper. But if your local newspaper really understand the community and they say, okay, here's the type of mis and disinformation that's happened again and again and again, now they could actually build a library of fact checks in advance so that it could actually help slow things down if they do have that trust with you.
Right. I'll try to fit in 2 more questions real quick. Here we go.
Yeah. Hi. My name is Alan, and I work for a nonprofit where I manage and direct a podcast where so it's mostly focused on the youth. Youth come on and talk about their experiences. My question is about journalism. So most of journalism is about sharing your story. And, sometimes when you share your story, you feel that connection and relation, not just with the person that you're interviewing, but also with your audience as well. My question is, do you think that AI is going to change that connection and relation that audiences have during that moment of someone sharing their story in journalism?
I think the example that you had given before, Brian, about potential like news anchors being replaced with kind of digital avatars is a good example of this. It'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years whether that ends up impacting people's enjoyment of a certain program, because I think the parasocial relationship that is developed in these sort of cases between a viewer and an anchor, or a reader and a journalist on Twitter, is kind of an essential component of people's modern consumption of news. So I think that AI could end up having, if these sort of avatars become more prominent, it could have a detrimental impact on that, or it could, people could get just as attached to a smiling anime girl as they would to, Wolf Blitzer. Who's to say?
Let's hope not, but possibly. But look, I've been out of CNN for more than a year. People still come up to me and say, "I love watching you," in the present tense, and I don't correct them. I try to be nice about it. But what that tells me is people, they have a connection that I don't always realize. I don't even recognize. And that's even more true for my wife, who's a morning anchor on New York One. Gets the morning. So people are awake half naked watching TV, and they're, every day. And so that repetition, just being like every day, it really matters, and it can't be replaced by AI. But I think it's going to make it incumbent on the humans, on the TV anchors, on the reporters, on the guests, to be more human. And what I mean by that is to share more of themselves, to be more transparent, to be more accessible. I could imagine an environment of chat bots that are in the voice of the anchor, right? Like that sort of thing, I think will end up being more important. Let's see if we can get in one more question right here. No pressure. Last question. It's got to be great. No pressure.
Hi. I am a songwriter from Brooklyn, and I would like to use AI in my work. I think part of my work is bridging connections where there were none before. And, I sometimes think, we live in such a divided country at the moment, that the use of AI might widen that gap. So specifically in the area of citations and how to source inspiration, what is the citation culture around AI in journalism? Do you say that you used AI, and do those people that coded the AI that you use also get cited in your writing? Because in my songwriting, I'm always looking for influence, inspiration, but there was like this fake Drake song that came out and everyone hated it because they found out that it was sung by an AI. And I would rather heal the divide and not widen it. So, interested.
Yeah. So I would say the contour is very uneven right now. So when I was at the AP, where I hired our first automation editor, and I was there when they used automation to write all the earnings report, we make sure that is written that like this is generated by automated insights. Right. So that's sort of AP standards. And right now when I use sort of Midjourney and DALL-E for any kind of photo illustration, what I do is I include my prompt in the illustration as transparency. Like, this is my prompt to get this image. So I would say right now, I don't think we have a universal standards. And that's something where we as an industry actually been thinking about, like, what does it look like for us to come up with some universal standards about citations, recognition that I would say, from the Times and other news, when they do use AI to write stuff, most of them will say this is written or edited by some kind of, automation of somewhat photo captioning that is still like, unclear.
Any other thoughts on this?
Just one thought, just since we see a lot of publishers and have been researching kind of not just what our Smart News's policy should be, but also what other publishers are doing. It is uneven, but I think we're seeing people err on the side of disclosure, some kind of transparency. The things that we're developing and testing, absolutely the policies that we will disclose and label as much as possible for transparency. So specifically for you, I would encourage that, but it's totally up to you, obviously.
So as we wrap, one sentence from each of you on what you want the folks in this room to come away with, what you want them to do or do differently, whether they're students or they're post-students using this technology. Who wants to go first? Again, no pressure.
One thing you should take away is read the news, subscribe to your paper, and be a very critical reader.
I would say be open to learning new things and don't be scared of these things. Play with them, learn how they work, and it'll empower you.
Yeah, I would say read some more, and don't. I think that there is a tendency to let these tools do the heavy lifting in terms of analysis of a large amount of content, but be open to the fact that sometimes trudging through that is where you can get kind of your greatest ideas.
Technology is not someone else's problem, it's all of our problems. So be informed and be ready to engage.
To our panel, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you also to the Center for Communication and to the library for having us. Have a great night. Thank you.